Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? I hope you're doing fine. And I'm happy to tell you that I'm doing fine myself. And I'm certainly glad to be with you once again. I am. Thank you very much for being here. And I graciously welcome each of you to TJ's Topics. That's right. Glad to be with you again. I consider it a joy, an honor, and a privilege to be able to come into your presence on any given occasion. And on this occasion, I have a relatively interesting topic, which is what if the Bible is full of make believe? That is the question I have for all of you today. What if the Bible is full of make believe? And there are many critics out here of the scriptures and religion in general who would most likely say that the Bible is chock full of a bunch of stories that contain some off the wall stuff. And I'm here to tell you that where I am now spiritually versus where I was 20 and 30 years ago, there are certain things in the scriptures that I question now that I believed wholeheartedly way back, because I lacked understanding. But, the scripture does tell us to study, to show ourselves approved unto God, a workman that needed not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. And so I think that's a very important thing for us to do. And it's something that everyone should consider doing, whether they're a part of the faith or not. It's not about being in this religion or that religion, but it's all about perspective and acquiring knowledge, wisdom, and understanding for oneself. So I'm going to get into it, okay? And I have listed some examples of things that we typically find in the Bible that a lot of folk might question now, whereas they may have went along with it back then because, we were taught to believe these things and accept them at face value as being real and everything was to be taken literally that was recorded in the scriptures. Examples of biblical characters and stories that some people might consider as myths, fables, or make believe in nature. That is what I have as the topic or as the title of these examples that I'm going to give you here. Beginning with number one, a talking snake. Now, you and I know that snakes don't talk in real life. Never have. They'll lick their tongue out, and depending on what kind of snake it is, it might bite you. Could be poisonous with that venom, and if you don't get to the emergency room quickly, it could be fatal. Well, this story is found in Genesis chapter 3, where the serpent, which is what is called in the scriptures, comes to Eve, who also is considered a made up character, and tells her that because God said that, that she and Adam were not to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in the day that they ate of it, they would surely die. Well, the serpent or the snake comes to Eve and tells her that they won't surely die, just because they eat the forbidden fruit, but their eyes would be opened and they would have knowledge and understanding that they didn't have prior to being instructed not to eat that fruit. But what I'm focusing on is the snake. When have you ever seen a snake talk? When have you ever seen a snake walk? I mean, come on now. I mean, this is just something I'm looking at. And some of you may be starting to look at that now yourself as you get older and you begin to do your own research on various things as it pertains to spirituality, especially that of religion and Christianity. Number two, the talking donkey, which is found in Numbers chapter 22, verses 21 through 29. Now, of course, this was Balaam's donkey, and he was a prophet in the Old Testament. And he was, getting ready to go and put a curse on the Israelites. Now, this is according to what the story has in detail. And God wasn't pleased with what was going on, And so Balaam was beating that donkey because the donkey saw the angels in front of him. And he didn't want to, keep going because, he was fearful. But Balaam wanted to keep going. And so he kept beating on that donkey. And finally, the donkey had enough and asked Balaam, "Why are you beating me? You don't need to beat me like that." Now, when have we ever seen a donkey talk in real life? All they've ever done is made a sound, make their sound. Yeah, that sound they make. But donkeys don't talk. Some people might consider that as make-believe. Number three, the flood. The big flood, which is found in Genesis chapters 6 through 9. Noah built this huge ark, and they had all the animals, all the birds, all the fish, all the insects, everything on the earth to come to this one location and get on that ark. And they would have to stay on there for 40 days and 40 nights while it rained on this planet and flooded everything, washing out everything and everybody who was not spared by entering into the ark. But let me ask you this. How do you think insects and horses and dogs and cats and birds and fish and all that from all over the world now, different countries and everything, could flock to this one area and get on the boat? And also, you got to consider the predatory aspect of all of this. Various animals are considered predators to certain groups of animals, and others are considered the prey of those predators. Like wolves, they consider sheep and certain other animals as prey, and stuff like that. Mice would be considered prey to owls. And dogs, they see certain creatures as prey, and they might be considered predators by another creature. That some people might consider that as make believe. I'm not saying it is, but a lot of people probably would. And for an ark to hold all those people and all those animals, and it wasn't, and the size of the ark, according to my understanding, the size of the ark was like the size of a football field, the average football field. Now, how would that work? You do your own research on that. Number 4, Jonah and the whale, which is found in the book of Jonah, chapter 1, verse 17. Now, Jonah was commanded by God to go into the city of Nineveh, and tell the people that unless they repented of their wrongdoing and turned away from their wickedness, that God was going to pour out his wrath on them and destroy the whole town. And Jonah didn't want to be obedient to God. So he allowed a whale to come along and swallow Jonah up inside, kept him trapped in there for 72 hours, 3 days and 3 nights, until the whale finally puked Jonah. Come on now. Where have you ever seen a whale that was big enough to swallow a man whole? So some people might have questions about that in this day and age, in 2026, when you're able to do research on everything. And finally, number 5, Moses and the Red Sea, which is found in the book of Exodus, chapter 14. You know, Pharaoh was getting ready to come after the Israelites. He wanted to trample them down. I mean, he wanted to kill them or do whatever he wanted to do with them. And the Israelites, being chosen by God, according to the narrative, they were provided for by way of escape, through the parting of the Red Sea. And Moses stretched out his rod, his right hand, and parted that Red Sea, and they were able to walk across and made it to the other side. Well, by the time Pharaoh and his army were trying to make their way across, then the Red Sea came back together and drowned all of them. But when have you ever seen something like that happen? A huge body of water part ways like that. I live by a huge body of water, the Mississippi River, which is just minutes from where I live. It's never done that. There are people who live in New York near the Atlantic Ocean, people who live in Los Angeles and along the West Coast near the Pacific Ocean. They've never seen anything like that. Water opening up and allowing people to walk across. Somebody might call it make-believe in the Bible, the way it's written. Again, I'm not saying that any of this is make-believe. These are just things that I'm looking at now from a different perspective from the way I looked at them when I was a child, when I was a teenager and even as a young adult. I don't view things the same way that I once did. And the older you get, the more you ought to begin to re-examine some things as well, especially when you realize that information is available to all of us, and much of it is free of charge. Therefore, there is no excuse for anyone to be walking around in a state of ignorance in the 21st century, even when it comes to religion and faith, and whatever we believe. So that's my take on it. What if the Bible is full of make-believe? And I'm not saying it is, and I wouldn't try to convince anybody that it is. I'm just saying, from my own personal views, based on where I am now in life, that things do appear a lot differently now to me than they did years ago. So you tell me what you think, okay? And I look forward to seeing you again next time. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of TJ's Topics. And I certainly appreciate your time. Look forward to seeing you again soon, okay? And hope you're enjoying this summer as well. This is Taryn Jerome Harris, reminding you that every round goes higher and higher. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.